Penguin Random House Audio presents Finding Manana, a memoir of a Cuban exodus, by Mirta Ojito. Read for you by the author with Juan Arturo.
To Arturo and to our children, Juan Arturo, Lucas, and Marcelo, my true home. Author's note. Throughout the reporting of this book, I have asked my characters to remember in great detail events that transpired 25 years ago, in some cases even longer than that. Unfortunate that many of them have very vivid memories. Some even kept written records and photographs of their participation in what turned out to be historic events. All depictions of the events that I didn't witness, including dialogue, have been double-checked with more than one source whenever possible. There are a few instances in which I've had to rely on only one source, either because the second party in a private meeting is dead or because the Cuban officials involved were unwilling to cooperate despite my repeated requests to interview them. Because quotation marks in journalism indicate that the words were spoken exactly as cited, I have opted not to use them unless I'm quoting from a published source or I witnessed the exchange and took notes.
Those who don't have revolutionary genes, revolutionary blood, a mind or heart which can adapt to the effort and heroism of a revolution aren't wanted here. They aren't needed. Fidel Castro, during a May 1st speech in Havana, 1980. We will continue to provide an open heart and open arms to refugees seeking freedom from communist domination and from economic deprivation, brought about primarily by Fidel Castro and his government. President Jimmy Carter, May 5, 1980, Washington, D.C.
Prologue. Havana, 1980. The police came on May 7, when I was about to have lunch. A plain yogurt sweetened with several spoonfuls of sugar, fried yellow plantains, and an egg and ketchup sandwich on half a loaf of Cuban bread. I was wearing a bata de casa, a house coat, over my painstakingly ironed school uniform, a blue skirt with 2 white stripes around the bottom hem, signaling I was in 11th grade, and a starched white poplin blouse, which I didn't want to stain with grease. I was just smoothing the pleats of my skirt over the back of my thighs when I heard the steps on the stairs that led to our second-floor apartment. I could tell that at least 3 people were coming up. By the way one of them paused after every other step, I knew that she was our downstairs neighbor and the president of the neighborhood watchdog committee. 2 other people, agile and strong, led the way and knocked on the door before I could alert my mother, who had been sewing a dress and now stood, perfectly still, next to a sewing machine. Her maroon skirt was littered with pieces of yellow thread. On the red plastic clock above the television set, it was 15 minutes past 11 in the morning. I waited for a signal from my mother, but she didn't move. Then our neighbor spoke. "Mirta," she called out, a little out of breath. "Open up. It's the police. You're leaving." My mother swallowed and opened the door. A burly government officer, unshaven and dressed in olive green pants and a white T-shirt with large sweat rings under his arms, walked in. Without introducing himself, he read our full names out loud. Orestes Maximino Ojito Denis, Mirta Hilaria Muñoz Quintana, Mirta Areli Ojito Muñoz, and Mabel Ojito Muñoz. "Are these the names of the people who live here?" he asked. My mother, who had started to tremble, nodded. "There is a boat waiting for you at the port of Mariel," he said, pausing a bit to gauge our reactions. He went on, "Are you ready and willing to abandon the country at this time?" "Yes," my mother said, her voice merely a whisper. "Abandon the country," he had said. I knew why the officer had chosen that word, and I refused to let it taint my family. I was 16, angry, opinionated, and politically aware. Abandonment was not a word I associated with us. I grew up knowing that one day I would leave Cuba with my family. My parents had met in the late 1950s, just as revolution was brewing in the mountains of eastern Cuba and in the hallways of the universities that dotted the island. Unlike many other Cubans who supported Fidel Castro's ascent to power in 1959 and then changed their minds, they had never really believed that a 33-year-old in dirty fatigues and a scraggly beard could make their world better. They were indifferent to his promises, just as they had been somewhat blind to the injustices of the dictator whom Castro had deposed, Fulgencio Batista. My parents, who were poor and simple folk from the countryside, had never been fans of Batista, but they believed a good government was one that stayed out of the way and allowed individuals to work hard to provide for their families. Batista did that. Fidel did not. Fidel demanded loyalty. When Castro came to power, my father worked at a store selling cloth by the yard to women who made their own dresses at home, as was fashionable then. He had aspired to be a traveling salesman, zigzagging the island in a company car, selling cloth to merchants in small towns. But shortly after the new government confiscated the store as part of its grand plan to build what it called an egalitarian workers' society, my father was assigned to a truck driving job. No one had asked him for his opinion, his plans, or his illusions. It was assumed that he would want to aid the revolution because, he was told, in doing so, he would help his country. Fiercely independent and completely apolitical, my father decided that he couldn't live in a place where government edicts, not his wishes or abilities, determined the kind of job he would perform for the rest of his life. In April 1961, around the time Castro announced in a televised speech the socialist nature of his regime, my father began making plans to join his older sister in the United States. In October 1962, he and my mother rushed their wedding date so that they could apply for a U.S. visa together. But then the missile crisis set the world on the brink of nuclear war, shadowing the first week of my parents' honeymoon and putting an end to their immigration plans. From the window of their oceanfront hotel room in Havana, they saw tanks rolling by and thousands of soldiers marching behind. The country was prepared for an American invasion that, to my father's chagrin, never came. When the crisis ended a few days after it began, the United States government tightened an economic embargo declared against Cuba in 1960, which meant, among other things, that I was reared on Russian baby food and that Russian cartoons, not Walt Disney's animated movies, informed the better part of my childhood. The United States all but stopped issuing visas to Cubans, and life in Cuba became even more difficult than it already was. Food was scarce, and the country was politically and economically isolated, except for the help of the Soviet bloc. Then, in a speech in September 1965, Castro suddenly announced that he would not stop anyone from leaving the island if Americans traveled south to the port of Camarioca on Cuba's northern coast to pick them up. Scores of Cuban Americans in Miami mobilized to charter boats, taking about 2,800 relatives in 160 vessels before the boatlift was stopped. President Johnson took Castro at his word and immediately set up an airlift program baptized as the Freedom Flights. More than 270,000 Cubans left the island in the 7.5 years that the Freedom Flights cruised the skies over the Florida Straits. We were not among them. The government would not authorize the exit of any male under the age of 27 who had not completed his military duties. In 1965, when I was not yet 2, my father was 26. He was told he had to wait a year before he could apply for an exit visa. As his May birthday approached, in 1966, my mother made me a sky blue corduroy jacket, appropriate for the winter land she imagined would greet us. It was double-breasted with large...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?